I woke up to the smell of hot plastic in a warning tone I had never heard before. Not loud. Just wrong. My inverter screen was pulsing red in the dark, numbers climbing past limits I had set myself, numbers that should never move that fast at 2 a.m. I was already on my feet before I was fully awake. Bare feet on cold concrete. The air felt charged, like a storm trapped inside my garage. Something was pulling power. Hard. And it wasn't me. I killed the overhead light and just stood there for a second, listening. That low hum didn't belong to my system. It came from outside. I stepped toward the side door and cracked it open an inch. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it again. A soft click. Followed by a steady electrical draw that made the back of my neck tighten. Someone was connected to my grid. I checked the monitor again. The load spike was clean. Smooth. Not a fault. Not random. This was controlled. That was the part that didn't sit right. Systems fail messy. This didn't. I pulled up the usage log with shaking fingers. Same pattern. Same time window. Repeating for days. Every spike started between 2:05 and 2:20 a.m. Every drop ended before sunrise. Like whoever was doing it didn't want to be seen. I scrolled back further. 3 nights. 5 nights. 7. My system had been feeding something I never authorized. The number at the bottom of the screen made my stomach turn. That wasn't a mistake. That was usage. I moved to the window facing the driveway and kept the lights off. My eyes adjusted slowly. Shapes came into focus. My fence. The side outlet. And then I saw it. A cable. Thick. Dark. Running from my wall to something just out of frame. I didn't breathe. I just waited. Then headlights flickered faintly through a parked silhouette. Sleek lines. Low profile. I knew that shape. A Tesla. The cable wasn't temporary. It was placed clean. Deliberate. Like it had been done before. My pulse slowed in a way that felt colder than panic. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was routine. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed I barely ever checked. The timestamp loaded. Grainy at first. Then clear. 2:11 a.m. A figure stepped into frame. Calm. No hesitation. She walked straight to my outlet like she had every right to be there. Even in black and white, I recognized her posture. That clipped, confident movement. HOA President Brenda Whitmore. She didn't look around. She didn't rush. She just plugged in. Like it was hers. I watched the cable lock into place. Watched the car wake up with that silent electric shift. Watched my system react instantly, numbers surging again on the other screen behind me. She stood there for a second, checking something on her phone, completely relaxed. That was the part that stuck. No fear. No doubt. She thought this was normal. I let the video loop once. Twice. Then I checked the previous nights. Same motion. Same time. Same confidence. Every single time. I leaned my head against the wall and listened to that hum again, steady and controlled, draining something I built with my own hands. I could feel the heat rising from the inverter behind me, pushing closer to a line I never let it cross. And she had no idea. Not yet. I watched her unplug, coil the cable, and disappear into the dark like nothing had happened. The system settled back down. Silent. Clean. Like it erased itself. But the numbers stayed. The pattern stayed. And now I knew exactly where to look. I did not sleep after that. The hum stayed in my head long after the system went quiet. By morning, the garage smelled faintly like warm circuitry and dust, that dry electric scent that only shows up when something has been pushed too far. I stood in front of the inverter with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, watching the numbers settle back into their normal rhythm like nothing had happened. That was the part that bothered me most. Clean reset. No error flags. No warnings logged. Just usage. Precise. Repeatable. Intentional. I scrolled through the data again in daylight, slower this time. Every spike had the same curve. Gradual ramp, steady draw, clean drop. Whoever was using my system understood how to avoid tripping safeguards. That was not luck. That was knowledge. I leaned closer to the screen, tracing the pattern with my finger. It almost looked respectful. Like they knew exactly how far they could go without breaking it. That detail stuck. It felt calculated. I set the cup down and walked outside. The morning air was cool, still carrying a hint of dew off the grass. My driveway looked normal. Too normal. No cable. No tire marks that stood out. The outlet on the side wall looked untouched. But when I crouched down, I saw it. A faint scuff along the plastic casing. Fresh. Subtle. Easy to miss if you were not looking for it. I ran my thumb over it and felt a slight rough edge. Something had been plugged in there repeatedly. Carefully. The kind of careful that comes from routine. I straightened up and glanced across the street. Her house sat exactly where it always had. Perfect lawn. Clean lines. White exterior catching the morning light like a magazine cover. And in the driveway, parked at an angle that felt intentional, was her Tesla. Quiet. Polished. Untouched. It looked like it had never moved. That did not match what I saw last night. I stood there a little longer than I should have. Something about the distance between my outlet and her driveway did not make sense at first glance. It was just far enough to seem inconvenient. Just far enough that most people would not try it. But then I pictured the cable again. Thick. Long, purpose-built. That changed the equation. I went back inside and pulled up the camera feed from earlier nights. Not just the moment she plugged in, but the minutes before. I slowed the playback. Watched the shadows shift. There it was. A small movement near the fence line. Not the car. Not her. The cable being pulled across the ground first. Placed carefully. Lined up before she even stepped into frame. She was preparing the connection before she made it. That meant she had done this enough times to refine it. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This was not random. This was a system. My system feeding hers. I opened another panel and checked total output over the past week. The difference between expected production and actual reserves was not small. It was measurable. It was growing. That meant she was not just topping off her battery. She was relying on it. That thought shifted something in my chest. This was not a one-time advantage. This was dependency. I pulled up the HOA guidelines on my laptop, scrolling through pages I had not touched in months. Buried between sections on landscaping and exterior paint colors was a line about unauthorized utility usage. Vague. Flexible. Easy to twist. I could already hear her voice in my head, smooth and confident, explaining how she was simply using available infrastructure. That was how she operated. Always just inside the line. Always with an explanation ready. I closed the document and looked back at the system display. The numbers were steady now. Predictable. Safe. But I knew what would happen tonight. Same time. Same draw. Same quiet theft dressed up as normal behavior. I walked back to the garage and rested my hand on the metal casing of the inverter. It was cool now. Stable. Under control. For the moment. I stayed there for a few seconds, listening to the silence. It felt different now. Not calm. Waiting. I turned and looked toward the side outlet again, picturing that cable sliding into place like it belonged there. She had done it enough times to feel comfortable. That comfort was the real problem. Because comfort leads to carelessness. And carelessness leaves patterns. I checked the time without thinking. Still early. Still hours before anything would happen. But the pattern was already set. And this time, I was ready to watch it happen from the beginning. I did not go over there right away. That would have been the easy move. Knock on her door, show her the footage, force a reaction. But something about the way she moved last night told me that would not work. She was too calm. Too practiced. People like that do not panic when you confront them. They pivot. They explain. They turn it into your problem. So I stayed on my side of the street and watched instead. Around 9 in the morning, her garage door lifted with that smooth, quiet glide. The Tesla rolled out slowly, almost silent, sunlight sliding across its surface like water. It looked perfect. Fully charged. That detail hit harder than I expected. She was not just borrowing power. She was depending on it. I leaned against my truck and pretended to check my phone as she stepped out. Brenda Whitmore in full daylight looked exactly like she did on camera. Composed. Controlled. Every movement measured. She spotted me within seconds. Of course she did. Her eyes tracked everything. She gave a small smile. Not friendly. Not hostile. Just enough to acknowledge that she had seen me first. That was her style. Establish control early. "Morning, Ethan," she said, voice smooth, like we were discussing the weather instead of what I had seen hours earlier. I nodded once. "Morning." I kept my tone flat. Neutral. She paused for a second longer than necessary, like she was waiting for something. Maybe an accusation. Maybe a question. When it did not come, she shifted slightly, adjusting the strap of her bag. Small movement. But it told me something. She was testing the space between us. I let the silence sit. It stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. Then she broke it. "Everything running okay over there?" she asked, nodding toward my house. Casual words. Not casual timing. I felt the weight of that question land. It was too specific. Too early. She was fishing. I took a slow breath and glanced back toward my garage like I had to think about it. "System has been stable," I said. Not a lie. Not the truth she expected either. Her smile tightened for half a second. Barely visible. But it was there. A micro-reaction. Then it was gone. "Good," she said. "These older setups can be unpredictable if they are not maintained properly." There it was. The shift. Subtle, but clear. She was already laying the groundwork. If anything went wrong, it would be my system. Not her actions. I nodded again, letting her have the line. "I keep it within spec," I said. Short. Simple. No opening. She studied me for a second longer. Her eyes moved past me toward the side of my house, just for a moment. Not long enough to be obvious. But long enough for me to catch it. She knew exactly where that outlet was. That look confirmed it. She had mapped my property in her head. That realization settled in quietly, heavier than I expected. This was not opportunistic. This was deliberate. Planned. Repeated. She stepped back toward her car, conversation already closing in her mind. Well, if you ever need a recommendation for inspection services, the HOA has a list of approved vendors, she said. The word approved hung there for a second. Not a suggestion. A reminder. I almost laughed at that. Not out loud. Just in my head. She was already positioning herself above the situation. That was her mistake. She assumed I would play inside her structure. I watched her get into the Tesla and close the door with a soft click. The car pulled away without a sound, leaving the driveway empty again. I stood there for a few seconds after she left, replaying every word, every glance. The conversation had been short. But it told me everything I needed. She knew the system. She knew the timing. And she believed she was untouchable. That belief was the real leverage. I walked back toward my garage slowly, feeling the concrete warm under the sun now. The inverter inside was quiet again, steady and controlled. No sign of what had happened overnight. But I could still see the pattern in my head. Clear. Precise. Predictable. I stopped at the side outlet and looked down at it again. Same faint scuff. Same clean placement. She would be back tonight. She had no reason not to be. From her perspective, nothing had changed. That was exactly what I needed. I rested my hand lightly against the wall next to the outlet, feeling the solid structure behind it. This was my system. My design. Every limit, every threshold, every response curve was something I had built from scratch. And she was stepping into it without understanding how it actually worked. That gap mattered. I stepped back and glanced toward the street one more time. Everything looked normal again. Quiet neighborhood. Clean driveways. Nothing out of place. But underneath that surface, something had already shifted. I checked the time again, not because I needed to, but because the pattern was already forming in my head. Tonight would not be different for her. It would be different for me. I did not wait until midnight to start preparing. By late afternoon, I was already in the garage, panels open, tools laid out in a straight line like I was about to rebuild the whole system from scratch. The sunlight coming through the side window hit the metal casing of the inverter just right, and for a second, everything looked calm. Too calm. That hum from last night was gone, but I could still feel where it had been. I plugged my laptop into the system and pulled up the live diagnostics. Clean. Stable. Every metric exactly where it should be. That was the illusion she was relying on. I scrolled deeper, into the advanced settings most people never touch. Load thresholds. Response delays. Automatic cutoffs. This was where the system decided how to behave under stress. I paused there for a second. Not because I did not know what to do, but because I understood what it meant. Once I changed this, there was no pretending it was just a coincidence. I would be letting the system respond differently. Still within spec. Still legal. But different enough to matter. I adjusted the load response curve first. Subtle change. Just enough to let the draw continue a few seconds longer before stabilizing. Then I added a delayed correction window. That part took more precision. Too fast, and it would shut down clean. Too slow, and it would flag an error. I needed it to sit right on the edge. I leaned back and watched the simulation run. Numbers climbed, held, then shifted. Controlled. Predictable. Exactly what I wanted. I saved the configuration and let the system idle again. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was important. I stepped outside and checked the outlet again. Same position. Same angle. I crouched down and measured the distance to the fence with my eyes. Enough room for the cable to slide through without snagging. She had practiced that. I stood up and looked toward her house. Empty driveway now. No sign of movement. But that did not mean anything. She worked in patterns. Night patterns. That was where she felt invisible. I went back inside and checked the cameras again. This time, I adjusted the angles slightly. Not obvious. Just enough to widen the frame near the outlet and the fence line. I wanted everything visible. Every step. Every motion. No blind spots. The screen flickered as the new feed loaded. Clear. Sharp. Ready. I set a secondary recording trigger tied directly to load spikes. That way, the moment she connected, every camera would lock in automatically. No delay. No missed frames. I tested it once with a manual draw. The system responded instantly. Cameras switched. Recording started. Clean execution. I shut it down and stood there in the quiet again. The garage felt different now. Not tense. Focused. Like everything inside it was waiting for a signal. I checked the time. Early evening. Still hours to go. The waiting was the hardest part. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew exactly what was coming. That predictability made it feel closer than it was. I forced myself to step away from the screens and go inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the refrigerator hum felt louder than usual. I poured another cup of coffee I did not need and stood by the kitchen window, looking out toward the driveway. Nothing moved. No cars. No people. Just a normal neighborhood settling into the evening. That contrast almost made me doubt it for a second. Almost. Then I remembered the footage. The pattern. The way she moved without hesitation. This was real. I set the cup down and went back to the garage as the light outside started to fade. The sky shifted from blue to that dull gray that comes right before night takes over. The system display glowed brighter now against the dimmer room. Numbers steady. Waiting. I rested my hand on the edge of the workbench and listened. Silence. No hum. No draw. Just the faint click of the system cycling normally. I checked the logs one more time, scrolling through the previous nights. Same window. Same behavior. It would happen again. It always did. I turned off the main light and let the garage sit in low shadow, lit only by the screens. It made the space feel smaller, tighter. More controlled. I moved to the side door and left it slightly open, just enough to hear outside without being seen. Cool air drifted in, carrying that faint scent of grass and distant pavement. Time slowed down after that. Every minute stretched a little longer than it should have. I checked the clock again. Closer now. The pattern was lining up exactly where it always did. I leaned against the wall and kept my eyes on the monitor. Waiting for the first sign. Waiting for the moment the system would react. It did not take long. The first spike hit at exactly 2:11 a.m. The number jumped so clean it almost looked fake. I felt it before I even saw it, that shift in the air, like the system took a breath it did not want. Then came the sound. A soft click outside, followed by that low, steady pull that had been haunting me since the first night. She was back. I did not move right away. I stayed still, eyes locked on the screen as the load climbed in a smooth curve, exactly like the logs said it would. No hesitation. No fluctuation. She knew how to connect without triggering anything obvious. That part still bothered me. I reached over and tapped the secondary feed. The cameras snapped on instantly, angles widening just enough to catch the edge of the fence line. There it was. The cable sliding across the ground first, dark against the concrete, placed with care like it had a path it always followed. Then her shadow. Calm. Steady. She stepped into frame a second later, phone in one hand, the other guiding the plug like she had done this 100 times. No rush. No fear. That confidence again. It made everything feel heavier. I leaned closer to the monitor, watching every movement. She crouched slightly, lined up the connector, and pushed it into place with a soft, final click. The system reacted instantly. The numbers surged higher than the previous nights, but still within the new limits I had set. That was the difference. The delay. The hold. It stayed there a second longer than it should have. I could see it on the graph, that small plateau forming where it never used to. My pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. This was the moment I had built for. She did not notice anything. Of course she did not. To her, everything looked normal. She glanced at her phone again, thumb moving across the screen like she was checking charge status. The Tesla responded with that faint internal shift, almost silent, drawing more power as it settled into the session. I could hear the inverter behind me working harder now, a deeper hum under the surface, like a machine being pushed just past comfort. The air warmed slightly around it. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to feel. That was the line. I kept watching the numbers. They held. Then climbed again. Another step. Controlled. Calculated. Exactly where I wanted them. But there was something else now. A slight oscillation in the load. Small. Almost invisible. But it was there. That had not happened before. I frowned and leaned in closer. The system was compensating, adjusting in real time to the extended draw. It was working, but it was not smooth anymore. That detail made my chest tighten. Not fear. Awareness. I checked the secondary metrics. Temperature rising faster than expected. Still safe. Still within spec. But closer to the edge than I had planned. I glanced at the camera feed again. She had not moved much. Just standing there, relaxed, one foot shifting slightly as she waited. Waiting for my system to fill her battery. That image locked in my head. My power. Her comfort. I looked back at the screen. The plateau stretched longer now. The delay holding exactly as programmed. Then the next phase started. A subtle shift in voltage distribution. Not visible to anyone without access to this panel. But I could see it. The system preparing to correct. I held my breath without realizing it. The hum deepened again, almost like a warning, but still controlled. Still legal. Still clean. That was the important part. I did not touch anything. I did not intervene. I let it run. The numbers peaked for a brief second, higher than any previous night. Then hovered. Right at the threshold. The kind of place most systems avoid. Mine stayed there. Because I told it to. I glanced at her one more time. Still calm. Still unaware. That confidence had not cracked yet. Not even slightly. I looked back at the screen as the system began its response cycle. It started slowly. Almost too slowly to notice. But I saw it. And I knew she would feel it next. The shift reached her before it reached the screen. I saw it in the way she straightened, just slightly, like something no longer felt right. The Tesla made a faint adjustment sound, deeper this time, not the smooth intake it had before. It was subtle, but it broke the rhythm. My eyes snapped back to the monitor. The voltage line had started to ripple. Not a spike. Not a drop. A controlled instability, exactly within the parameters I had set. The system was no longer feeding passively. It was responding. I leaned in closer, watching the numbers fluctuate in tight intervals. The load was still there, still pulling, but now it had resistance built into it. Not enough to trigger a shutdown. Not enough to alert her. Just enough to force the car to adjust. And that was where things got interesting. The Tesla tried to compensate. I could see it in the draw pattern, small surges layered over the main curve. It was trying to stabilize its intake, like it expected a consistent source and was not getting one. That mismatch started to build. I heard the inverter behind me shift again, the hum tightening, more focused, like it was working through a problem instead of just supplying power. The air in the garage warmed another degree. Still safe. Still clean. But no longer comfortable. I checked the temperature reading. Rising faster now. Within limits, but pushing toward the edge I had calculated. I looked back at the camera feed. Brenda had stepped closer to the car, her head tilted slightly, eyes on the dashboard. That was the first real sign. Curiosity. Not concern yet. But she noticed something. Her hand hovered near the door handle, then pulled back. She was waiting to see if it corrected itself. That confidence again. She trusted the system to behave. That trust was about to cost her. I shifted my focus back to the panel. The delay window closed. The system moved into the correction phase. Slowly. Controlled. The voltage adjusted downward in micro steps, then back up, creating a loop the car was not designed to handle cleanly. It was not a fault. It was not damage. It was confusion. The kind that forces a system to protect itself. The Tesla responded with a sharper internal click this time. Louder than before. Not loud enough to echo, but enough to break the silence outside. Brenda heard it. I saw her posture change. Shoulders tightening just a fraction. She stepped back half a step, eyes still fixed on the car. I held my breath without meaning to. The numbers on my screen hovered again, then shifted more aggressively. The oscillation widened. Still within spec. Still legal. But now undeniable. The car tried again to stabilize, pulling harder for a brief second. That was the moment. The system resisted. Clean. Immediate. The load flattened. Then dipped. Not a full drop. Just enough to interrupt the flow. I saw it register in the data before she felt it physically. The Tesla lights flickered once. Barely visible. But it was there. Brenda froze. Completely still now. That calm confidence was gone. Replaced with something sharper. Awareness. She moved closer again, quicker this time, reaching toward the connector like she might unplug it. But she stopped halfway. Waiting. Watching. Testing. The system held the unstable pattern for another second. Then another. Long enough to make the behavior undeniable. I could feel the tension in my own chest building with it. Not fear. Precision. Everything was happening exactly as designed, but the timing mattered now. Too long, and it would look intentional. Too short, and she might ignore it. I needed it to sit right on that edge where it felt like a system glitch she could not explain. The inverter hum deepened once more, then leveled out. The voltage line began to smooth again, but not completely. Just enough to suggest recovery. The Tesla responded, trying to resume normal draw. For a second, it almost worked. The numbers climbed back into a stable range. The car settled. Brenda's posture loosened slightly. That flicker of confidence returned. And that was the opening I needed. Because the system was not done yet. The system let her believe it had recovered. That was the point. The numbers smoothed out just enough to look stable again, the hum easing back into something familiar, something predictable. I watched the curves settle and knew exactly what she would think. A minor glitch. A momentary fluctuation. Nothing serious. That was how systems train people. Small errors that corrected themselves. Confidence built on patterns. She leaned closer to the car again, slower this time, eyes scanning the dashboard, waiting for confirmation that everything was back to normal. The Tesla responded with a soft internal tone, almost reassuring. That sound carried through the quiet night air, clean and controlled. It told her what she wanted to hear. I did not move. I kept my eyes on the screen, tracking every micro shift in the load. The system was holding the line I gave it, hovering just under full stability, just enough tension left in the curve to trigger the next phase. That was the part she could not see. She stepped back slightly, one hand resting on the roof of the car, posture loosening again. That confidence was returning. It always did when nothing broke immediately. People trusted delayed reactions less than instant ones. They ignored them. That was the opening. The system waited another 2 seconds. Then it moved. Not sharply. Not violently. Just a subtle rebalancing across the load channels, shifting power distribution in a way the car could not predict. The graph on my screen bent again, but this time it did not ripple. It tilted. Slow at first, then more pronounced. The Tesla reacted instantly. A sharper click, followed by a faint drop in draw that lasted less than a second. Enough to interrupt the flow. Not enough to stop it. I saw Brenda's head snap slightly toward the connector. That was the first real break in her composure. Small. Controlled. But there. She crouched lower this time, closer to the port, her attention fully locked in. She was trying to understand it now, not just observe it. That shift mattered. The system held the imbalance for another second. Then corrected again, but not fully. It created a loop. Slight drop. Slight surge. Repeat. Each cycle just a little more noticeable than the last. The Tesla tried to adapt, pulling harder, then easing back, searching for a stable input that no longer existed. That feedback loop tightened. I could hear it in the inverter behind me, the hum no longer smooth, but segmented, like a machine recalculating every fraction of a second. The air warmed again. Not dangerous. But persistent. I checked the temperature line. Still inside the safe band. Exactly where it needed to be. I glanced back at the camera feed. Brenda had moved closer. Again, almost directly over the charging port now. Her phone was no longer in her hand. It hung loosely at her side, forgotten. That told me everything. Her focus had shifted completely. She was no longer casually taking advantage. She was invested. The Tesla emitted another internal sound, slightly louder this time, followed by a brief flicker along the edge of the front display. That flicker was quick. Easy to miss. But she saw it. Her body stiffened again. She reached toward the connector, fingers brushing against it, then stopping. Hesitation. That was new. She was no longer sure. I leaned closer to my screen, watching the system prepare the next adjustment. The delay window reset internally, stacking on top of the previous cycles. That layering effect was intentional. It made each correction feel unrelated, like separate issues instead of a single pattern. That confusion was key. The graph dipped again. Deeper this time. The Tesla responded with a stronger correction, pulling more aggressively for a split second. The system resisted immediately. Clean. Precise. The load flattened again, but now the gap was wider. The imbalance held longer. I saw it reflect in the data before the physical reaction fully showed. Then it hit. The Tesla paused. Not a full shutdown. Not yet. But a clear interruption. The kind that forced the system to reassess. Brenda stepped back this time without thinking, one full step, eyes locked on the car. That was the moment her confidence cracked. Not gone. But fractured. She looked down at the cable, then back at the car, then toward the street like she was checking if anyone else noticed. The neighborhood stayed silent. Dark. Still. That silence worked in my favor. It made everything feel isolated. Personal. I watched the numbers climb again, slower now, heavier, like the system itself was deciding whether to continue. That hesitation was built in. That was the trigger point. I could feel it coming before it showed on the screen. The system was about to make a decision she would not expect. The system paused longer than before, and that pause changed everything. It was not just a delay now. It felt like a decision. The numbers on my screen stopped climbing for a full second, then another, holding in a place that no normal charge cycle would ever sit. That silence in the data translated instantly outside. The Tesla went still. Completely still. No hum. No adjustment. Just a quiet absence where there had been constant draw seconds ago. Brenda noticed it immediately. Her posture shifted again, sharper this time, her hand moving back toward the connector without hesitation. She touched it lightly, almost testing if it was still alive. That was the moment she stopped trusting it. I leaned closer to the monitor, watching the system hold that suspended state just long enough to create doubt. That was the purpose. Not failure. Uncertainty. The graph flickered once, a tiny movement that looked like recovery, then flattened again. The Tesla responded with a soft internal click, but it did not resume charging. It hesitated. That hesitation spread into her movements. She pulled her hand back slowly, eyes narrowing at the port, then at the car, then back again. She was trying to read it. Trying to decide if this was temporary or something worse. The system waited one more second. Then it shifted. Not gradually this time. A clean drop in load. Not a crash. Not a shutdown. Just a controlled release that cut the draw enough to break the connection cycle. I saw it on the panel first. The load line dipped below the threshold and stayed there. That was the trigger. The Tesla reacted instantly. A sharper tone this time, louder than anything before, followed by a brief flicker across its interface that lit her face for half a second. She stepped back again, more abruptly now, her confidence fully gone. That sound did not belong to normal operation. She knew it. The cable stayed locked in place, but the system on her side had already started protecting itself. I could see the pattern in the data. The car was rejecting the input. Not because it was damaged, but because it no longer trusted the source. That distinction mattered. It meant everything was still within bounds. Still clean. Still reversible. But from her perspective, something was wrong. Very wrong. She moved closer again, faster this time, crouching. Lower, one hand reaching for the connector with more urgency. Not panic. But close. She hesitated again right before touching it, like she expected it to react. That hesitation told me the effect had landed. I watched the system initiate the next phase automatically. A brief surge, higher than before, but shorter, designed to confuse rather than sustain. The Tesla tried to respond, pulling for a fraction of a second, then cutting itself off again. That repeated cycle built a pattern the car could not resolve. Accept. Reject. Accept. Reject. Each switch faster than the last. The inverter behind me mirrored it with a tight, pulsing hum that filled the garage in short bursts. The air felt thicker now, not hot, but charged with something active. I checked the readings again. Still within safe limits. Exactly where I needed them. I glanced back at the camera feed. Brenda had stepped fully back now, one hand on her hip, the other hovering near the door handle like she was deciding whether to get in or disconnect. She looked toward the street again, quick, almost instinctive, then back to the car. No one else moved. No lights came on. The neighborhood stayed asleep. That isolation pressed in around her. This was no longer casual. This was a problem she had to solve alone. The Tesla emitted one more tone, lower this time, followed by a complete stop and draw. The system on my side flattened instantly. Clean. Silent. Done. I saw the load drop to baseline and hold there. No recovery attempt. No slow climb back. Just zero. That was the final break. The connection still existed physically, but functionally it was over. She stood there for a second, staring at the car, then at the cable, then back again, like she was waiting for it to fix itself. It did not. I kept my eyes on the screen, watching for any unexpected response. Nothing came. The system had completed its cycle exactly as designed. Everything was stable again. Controlled. Quiet. I exhaled slowly, not from relief, but from confirmation. It worked. But it was not finished yet. Because what she did next would decide everything. She did not unplug it right away. That surprised me more than anything. She just stood there, staring at the connector like it might start working again if she waited long enough. The Tesla stayed silent. No hum. No flicker. Just a clean, empty state where the charge had been seconds ago. I watched her shoulders rise slowly, then fall, like she was forcing herself to stay calm. That control was still there. Cracked, but not gone. She reached out again, this time committing to it, fingers wrapping around the connector with a firm grip. For a second, nothing happened. Then she pulled. The cable came loose with a dull, mechanical click that echoed louder than it should have in the quiet night. She stepped back immediately, like she expected a reaction. There was none. The system on my side stayed flat. No draw. No response. Just silence. She looked down at the connector in her hand, turning it slightly, checking the pins, the casing, like the answer might be visible if she stared long enough. That hesitation lingered. Then she looked back at the car. The screen inside the Tesla lit up briefly, casting a soft glow across her face. I could not see the details, but I did not need to. The way she leaned and told me everything. She was reading something she did not like. Her posture tightened again. That was the second break. Not just confusion now. Concern. She tapped the screen once, then again, slower, like she was trying to force a response. The car stayed quiet. No change. That silence started to stretch. I felt it from inside the garage, watching through the monitor, feeling the same stillness settle over everything. It was the kind of quiet that makes small movements feel louder than they are. She stepped back from the car and looked toward my house. Not directly. Just a quick glance. But it was enough. That was the first time she checked. Not the street. Not the surroundings. Me. Even without seeing my face, I felt that shift land. She knew something was off. She just did not know what. I stayed perfectly still, eyes on the screen, letting the cameras capture everything without interference. She moved again, faster now, coiling the cable with tighter motions than before. Not rushed. But no longer relaxed. Each loop was shorter. Sharper. That detail stood out. Control turning into urgency. She placed the cable down for a second, then picked it back up like she could not decide what to do with it. That indecision spread into her stance. Weight shifting from one foot to the other. Head turning slightly, scanning the driveway, the fence line, the dark windows around her. Still no one moved. The neighborhood stayed asleep. That isolation pressed harder now. She walked to the driver's side door and opened it quickly, sliding inside without the usual pause. The interior lights came on, bright for a moment, then dimmed. I watched the screen as she interacted with the dashboard again, movements sharper now, less controlled. The Tesla responded with a series of soft tones, different from before, shorter, more abrupt. I saw the pattern in the logs mirror that change. The car was no longer attempting to draw power. It had shifted into a protective state. That was the result I needed. Not damage. Not failure. Just rejection. She stayed inside for a few seconds longer than expected. That pause felt heavy. Like she was deciding her next move. Then the door opened again. She stepped out, closing it harder than before. Not loud. But not soft either. Another crack in that controlled exterior. She picked up the cable again, this time with purpose, and walked it back toward the fence line. The movement was efficient. Direct. No extra motions. She was done here. But the way she moved told me something else. She would not forget this. She would come back to it. The cable disappeared over the fence, leaving the outlet exposed again. Empty. Untouched. Like nothing had happened. She stood there for a second longer, looking at the spot where it had been connected, then turned and walked back to her car. The door shut. The engine did not start right away. That delay felt longer than it should have. Then finally, the car powered on, quiet as ever, and rolled slowly out of the driveway. I watched the tail lights fade into the distance on the monitor until they were gone. The system in front of me stayed steady. Calm. Perfectly within range. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle in again. Everything had worked. Every phase. Every response. Exactly as designed. But one thing had changed that I could not see on any screen. She had noticed. The house felt different after she left. Not quieter. Just aware. I stood in the garage a few seconds longer, watching the system hold its steady line like nothing had ever happened. The numbers were perfect. Balanced. Clean. That was the part one trusted. What I did not trust was what came next. Because she had seen something she could not explain. People like Brenda do not ignore that. They come back to it. I powered down the extra camera feeds but left the triggers active. No reason to change anything visible. The illusion had to stay intact. I walked over to the side outlet and crouched down, running my fingers across the same faint scuff marks. Still there. Still subtle. Nothing about this setup would tell anyone what really happened last night. That was important. If she came back, it had to look untouched. I stood up slowly and glanced across the street. Her driveway was empty. The house dark. No sign of movement. But that did not mean she was done. It meant she was thinking. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, replaying the footage from earlier. Every second. Every shift in her posture. The moment her confidence slipped. I watched it twice. Then again. There was a pattern in her reaction. She did not panic. She assessed. That meant she would not walk away from this. She would test it again. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not the same way. But she would come back. I leaned back in the chair and let that thought settle. The system had done exactly what I needed. It created doubt without leaving damage. That was the line I had to hold. If anything broke, she could claim it. If everything stayed clean, she had nothing but suspicion. That balance mattered. I checked the logs one more time. No residual errors. No flags. Just a clean record of controlled fluctuation followed by a complete drop in draw. From a technical standpoint, nothing was wrong. That was the strongest part of the plan. I closed the laptop halfway and listened to the house. The quiet felt heavier now. Like it was waiting for something else to happen. I checked the time without thinking. Still early morning. A few hours before the neighborhood would wake up. I wondered what she was doing right now. Sitting in her car replaying it. Standing in her kitchen looking at her phone. Maybe already drafting an explanation. That thought made me pause. She would not admit what she had done. Not directly. She would frame it. Adjust it. Turn it into something that fit her version of control. That was her pattern. I stood up and walked back to the garage, drawn by the system more than anything else. The inverter screen glowed softly in the dim light, numbers steady, no sign of stress. I rested my hand against the casing again. Cool. Stable. Like it had reset itself completely. But I knew better. The configuration was still there. Waiting. I checked the camera angles one more time. Everything lined up. Clear view of the outlet. Clear view of the fence line. No blind spots. If she came back, I would see it from the first movement. I stepped back and turned off the last overhead light, letting the room fall into low shadow again. The screens provided just enough glow to keep everything visible. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a second, replaying the sequence in my head. The hesitation. The glance toward my house. That was the detail that stayed with me. She had started to connect the problem to something outside the car. That meant she might change her approach. Maybe she would test during the day. Maybe she would bring someone else. Or maybe she would act like nothing happened and try again the same way. That uncertainty was the only variable left. I opened my eyes and looked at the outlet one more time. Still empty. Still waiting. The system was ready. I just did not know how she would come back to it. She did not come back that night. That was the first break in the pattern. I noticed it before I even checked the clock. The system stayed flat. No spike. No click. Just a quiet, steady line that felt almost unnatural after everything I had seen. I stood in the garage longer than I needed to, watching nothing happen. That silence told me more than any data point could. She was adjusting. I went inside and kept the laptop open, camera feeds running in the corner of the screen while the rest of the house settled into its normal routine. Morning light came in slow, washing over the driveway, the fence line, the outlet. Everything looked untouched. But I knew better. By mid-morning, I saw movement across the street. Her garage door opened again, smooth and controlled like always. The Tesla sat inside, angled slightly differently than the day before. That detail caught my attention. Small shifts meant something. She stepped out a moment later, dressed the same way she always was. Clean. Precise. But her pace was different. Slower. More deliberate. She looked toward my house before doing anything else. Not a glance this time. A check. That was new. I stayed back from the window, just enough to keep her from seeing me directly. She walked down her driveway without her phone in hand, which was unusual. No distraction. No casual posture. She stopped near the edge of her property and looked at the ground between us, tracing the distance with her eyes like she was measuring something. That confirmed it. She was thinking about the connection point. I felt a slight tension build in my chest. Not fear. Anticipation. She turned and walked back to her garage, disappearing inside for a few seconds. Then she came out again, holding something small. A charging adapter. Different from the one she used before. I leaned closer to the window without thinking. That change mattered. She was not guessing anymore. She was testing. She walked halfway down her driveway, stopped, and looked toward my side again. No one else was outside. The street was quiet. She hesitated for a second, then turned and went back inside again. The adapter disappeared with her. That sequence played out quickly, but it told me everything. She was not done. She was recalibrating. I stepped back from the window and went straight to the garage. The system display was still clean, steady, no activity. But I knew it would not stay that way for long. I opened the configuration panel again and checked every setting. Load response. Delay windows. Thresholds. Everything exactly where I had left it. No need to change anything. The system was already built for this. I checked the cameras again, adjusting one angle by a fraction to capture more of the driveway edge. If she tried something new, I wanted it recorded. I stepped back and let the garage fall into that same low light again. The air felt still, waiting. I checked the time. Midday. Too early for her usual pattern. But she had already broken that once. That meant the timing was no longer predictable. I stayed close to the system through the afternoon, not watching every second, but never fully stepping away. Every small noise made me glance back at the screen. Every shadow outside caught my attention. Then, just after sunset, I heard it. Not the click. Not yet. Something softer. Footsteps. Not on my side. On hers. I moved to the side door and listened. Slow movement. Careful. Not the same rhythm as before. I cracked the door open slightly and looked through the gap. She was there. Not with the cable. Not yet. Just standing near the fence, looking directly at the outlet. Studying it. That alone told me this was different. She was no longer just using it. She was investigating it. I felt the shift immediately. The pattern had changed. And whatever she was about to do next, it would not be the same as before. She did not cross the fence right away. She just stood there, close enough to see every detail of the outlet, her head slightly tilted like she was trying to solve a problem that should have been simple. The light from her house barely reached that corner, leaving her face half in shadow, but her posture said everything. Focused. Careful. No wasted movement. This was not the same woman who walked over in the middle of the night without hesitation. This was someone checking for a mistake she did not want to admit existed. I stayed still behind the door, watching through the narrow gap, letting the system sit quiet behind me. No hum. No draw. Nothing to give her a hint. She crouched slightly, not touching the outlet yet, just studying it. Her eyes moved from the casing to the wall, then to the ground where the cable had rested before. That detail lingered. She remembered exactly how she had set it up. That meant she was comparing it now, looking for anything out of place. I felt the tension build in my chest again, not from fear, but from timing. If she touched it now, the system would not react. It was idle. That was the risk. Too clean, and she might suspect something deeper. But she did not touch it. Not yet. She stood back up slowly and stepped away half a pace, creating distance like she was trying to see it from a different angle. That hesitation stretched. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the adapter I had seen earlier. Different design. Slightly longer casing. She turned it in her hand, checking the fit against the outlet without actually plugging it in. That alone told me she was thinking about compatibility. Not just usage. She was troubleshooting. I leaned closer to the door, careful not to make a sound, watching every small adjustment in her movement. She stepped closer again, slower this time, and brought the adapter within inches of the outlet. She paused there. Held it. Waited. Like she expected something to happen before she even made contact. Nothing did. The silence held. The system behind me stayed flat. No response. That seemed to settle something in her. She exhaled, barely visible, and pulled the adapter back slightly. Then she looked toward my house again. Longer this time. Not a glance. A check. I stayed completely still, letting the darkness inside hide any sign of movement. After a few seconds, she looked away and crouched lower again, bringing the adapter closer to the outlet a second time. This time, she tapped the casing lightly with her fingers, testing it. A small movement, but deliberate. Still nothing. No reaction. That lack of response shifted her confidence again. Just enough. She straightened up and stepped back, lowering the adapter to her side. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. Not fully. But enough to tell me she was forming a new assumption. From her perspective, the outlet was normal. The problem had to be somewhere else. That was exactly where I needed her. She turned toward the fence, then stopped again, like something was still not sitting right. That pause felt longer than the others. Heavier. Then she turned back once more and looked directly at the outlet. Not scanning now. Not comparing. Just looking. That kind of stillness meant she was locking in a conclusion. I could feel it even without hearing her thoughts. She believed the issue was with her car. Not my system. That belief was the final piece. She slipped the adapter back into her pocket and took one last step back, putting distance between herself and the outlet. Then she turned and walked away without rushing, her pace returning to that controlled rhythm I had seen before. The same posture. The same calm surface. But something underneath it had shifted. I waited until she disappeared fully into the shadows near her house before I moved. Slowly, I closed the door and turned back toward the system. The display was still steady. Quiet. Perfectly balanced. No sign that anything had just happened outside. I stepped closer to the inverter and watched the numbers for a second longer, letting the silence settle again. Everything was in place now. The pattern had changed, but the control had not. I knew she would come back to it. Just not the same way. She came back 2 nights later. Not at 2 in the morning this time. Not hiding behind routine. It was earlier. Just after midnight, when the street still held a faint trace of life, a porch light here, a television glow there. That alone told me everything had changed. I was already in the garage when the first sound reached me. Not the click. Not yet. Footsteps again. Slower than before. Measured. I moved to the door and watched through the same narrow gap. She did not hesitate at the fence this time. She stepped right up to it and leaned over slightly, looking straight at the outlet like she had already made her decision. No adapter in her hand now. Just the same cable. The original one. That detail locked in immediately. She trusted her equipment again. That meant her conclusion from the night before had settled. The problem was not here. It was her car. I stayed still, letting the moment stretch. She pulled the cable across the ground with the same careful motion as before, but there was something tighter in it now. Less casual. More controlled. She was not relaxed. She was focused. She crouched and lined up the connector without rushing, eyes fixed on the outlet, not the surroundings. That shift mattered. She was no longer worried about being seen. She was worried about the result. The connector slid into place with that familiar soft click. Clean. Precise. The system behind me reacted instantly. The load spiked, smooth and controlled, just like before. I watched the numbers climb, my attention split between the screen and her reflection in the camera feed. She stepped back slightly, eyes already on the car, waiting. That waiting felt heavier this time. Not confident. Expectant. The Tesla responded with a faint hum, the initial intake pulling power exactly as designed. For a second, everything looked normal. Perfect, even. The graph held steady. The hum stayed smooth. I could see it in her posture. A slight release. Not relief. Confirmation. She had been right. Or at least, she thought she was. That was the opening. I kept my eyes on the system as it entered the delay window again. The same pattern. The same timing. But this time, the effect would land differently. Because she was watching for it. The voltage line began to shift. Subtle at first. A small ripple that most people would miss. She did not miss it. I saw her head tilt immediately, attention snapping back to the car. The hum changed. Slightly deeper. Less smooth. That tiny break in rhythm was enough. Her shoulders tightened again. Not as much as before. But enough. She stayed where she was, closer than the previous night, ready to react faster. The system held the imbalance longer this time. Just a fraction. But it stretched the moment. The Tesla tried to compensate, pulling harder for a brief second. The system resisted. Clean. Immediate. The draw flattened, then dipped. I saw it in the data before the physical reaction showed. Then it hit. A sharper tone from the car. Louder than before. Not alarming. But unmistakable. She stepped forward instantly, hand reaching for the connector, but she stopped short again. That hesitation was back. Stronger now. She was caught between reacting and observing. That tension held her in place. The system cycled. Again. Accept. Reject. Accept. Reject. Faster than before. Tighter. More precise. The inverter behind me pulsed with it, short bursts of sound that filled the garage like a heartbeat out of sync. The air felt charged again. Not hot. Just active. I checked the readings. Still inside limits. Exactly where they needed to be. I glanced back at the camera. She was fully engaged now, leaning toward the car, eyes locked on every response. No distraction. No confidence. Just focus. The Tesla paused again. That same moment of stillness. But this time, it did not recover as smoothly. The next surge came sharper. Shorter. Then cut. The system flattened the load completely. Clean. Final. The hum stopped. The car went silent. Completely silent. That silence landed harder this time. She did not step back right away. She stayed there, staring at the car like she expected it to come back to life. It did not. I watched the screen. The numbers held at 0. No attempt to reconnect. No fluctuation. Just a clean, stable baseline. The cycle had completed again. But this time, there was no confusion. No doubt. She knew it was happening again. Her hand dropped slowly to her side. The connector stayed in place, unused, meaningless now. She looked at it, then at the outlet, then back at the car. That sequence repeated once. Twice. Like she was trying to force a different answer. Nothing changed. I stayed still in the dark, watching the system hold its perfect line, feeling the quiet settle around it again. Everything was exactly where I wanted it. Controlled. Clean. Unquestionable. She reached for the connector again, slower this time, and pulled it free with a sharper motion than before. The click echoed across the driveway, louder than it should have. She did not hesitate after that. The cable coiled quickly in her hands, tighter than before, each loop more deliberate. She turned toward the fence without looking back at the car again. That detail stood out. She was done testing. Done waiting. The cable disappeared over the fence, leaving the outlet exposed again. Empty. Untouched. I watched her walk back to her car, movements controlled but no longer calm. She opened the door, paused. For a second, then looked once more toward my house. Not searching. Not questioning. Just looking. That look stayed longer than any before it. Then she got in and closed the door. The Tesla powered on, silent as ever, and rolled out of the driveway. I followed the movement on the screen until the lights faded into the distance again. The system in front of me stayed steady. Perfect. Unmoved. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle completely this time. No hum. No draw. Just control. She had her answer now. But she did not have proof. And that was the only part that mattered.